What's up, guys? If you didn't see the last video, I finished the tube front on the E36, or at least most of it. So now I want to go ahead and finish off the 2JZ build. So if you saw the last episode of working on the 2JZ, you'll know that I haven't done any of the accessories yet. There's some oil lines and things like that need to be hooked up, like the VVTi. And then all the sensors, I need to make sure I have all the right sensors in there. And then do something with the intake manifold, most likely weld it onto the lower runners and get that ready. There's no gasket on the exhaust manifold or anything like that. So gonna take off the intake manifold, the exhaust manifold, and the front covers, and basically finish off building this thing. And then once we're done with that, we're gonna put on the BMW ZF transmission adapter, as well as the clutch and transmission. So yeah, thank you guys a whole bunch, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Next up, I almost forgot about this. I need to take the oil pan back off, and I have a weld-in fitting for the turbo drain, and then there's an O-ring that I need to put in there as well. So I'm gonna get this thing flipped over, and then we'll take the pan off. Okay, so I got a turbo line kit off Amazon for like 30 bucks. It's probably not great quality, but hopefully it'll work for what I need. And it does include a weld-on bung. It's not necessarily ideal. Usually you like a weld-on bung that has a lot that sticks out on this side so that you can actually weld it from the inside of the pan. But the 2JZ GE pan already has a spot here where the oil drain would normally go. It's just not drilled out, as you can see. And Drift Motion sells a bung that actually bolts in here. You just drill these and tap them, and then it has an O-ring to seal it. But I would rather go the weld-on route, so that's what I'm gonna do. So the first thing I need to do is drill out this hole. Okay, I got the hole drilled out, and I ground down the surface to get rid of any dirt and anything that was on there. And then I also ground the edges of the bung just to make sure there wasn't any kind of coating on it that would contaminate the weld. So now we can stick it on there and weld it up. Got the bung welded on. Looks like poop because it was my first time ever TIG welding aluminum, but as long as it doesn't leak, that's all that matters, which I don't think it will. I melted it pretty good. So now once it cools down, I gotta clean the crap out of it. We need to make sure all the metal shavings are out of it, and all the dirt and debris and gasket material and everything else, and then we can put it back on. And this time, hopefully, I don't forget to put this O-ring in here. So while I'm waiting for the oil pan to cool down, I figured now would be a good time to replace the rear main seal, because the oil pan actually seals to the rear main seal right here. So before I put the oil pan back on and silicone it, might as well take this off now, get it replaced, and then I don't have to worry about re-siliconing it after I replace this. So anyways, there's two options for rear main seals. You can buy this whole housing with the seal already in it, which is great, makes it super easy, but it's more expensive. So the alternative is to buy just the seal, pull the seal out of the housing and put a new seal in, which is what I'm about to do. So to get the old seal out, we're just gonna try to tap it out from the inside, see if that works. Oh yeah, piece of cake. Now there's a little bit of corrosion and grime buildup on the inside of here, so I'm gonna clean that out real quick before we put the new one back in. Now we have the new rear main seal to go in. All we have to do is tap it in, making sure that it is flush with the face here. We don't want it any deeper than that. And there it is. Now we can silicone this back up and put a little bit of dielectric grease on the inside of the seal and stick it back on. So while I was waiting for the RTV to dry, I got the O-ring in this side of the water neck, and I've got the gasket on this side. And then this water neck, it had a little nipple right here that stuck out and sent coolant somewhere else. And I don't need that. It's just a press-in nipple, so I pulled it out and then welded that hole shut. So now we can stick this neck on and then flip this thing back over. Now we're going to take the crank pulley back off and the front covers and start working on getting all the accessories on. And we need to take the front covers off so we can put the serpentine belt tensioner on. So I got the serpentine tensioner on and torqued. I got the crank sensor on and a couple other sensors. So now we can put the covers back on and then get all the accessories on. Okay, so the 2JZ power steering pump is held up in one corner by the AC compressor. And if you're deleting AC, you need to do something else to hold the power steering pump up. There's a couple different kits you can buy. One of them is just like an adjustable rod that goes from one bolt hole up to the corner. Or if you're on a tight budget, you can just take apart the AC compressor and use the parts that attach to the power steering pump and get rid of the rest. So that's what I'm about to do here. So we're basically gonna strip this whole compressor apart and get rid of everything that we don't need off of it. Okay, it took me a little bit to figure out how to get this clutch apart. So it's got a 10mm bolt in there. You take that out, and then this pulley here actually has some 12mm threads that are outside of the 10mm threads. So once you take the 10mm bolt out, you can take a bigger 12 mil, any of the 12 mil bolts off the 2JZ, and thread that in and hold this pulley, and it'll pull the pulley out. And then once you have this off, there's a snap ring that holds this pulley on. So you gotta take that off, and then supposedly if you tap it, it'll come off. Okay, we got that pulley off. Then there's another snap ring inside of here. Then that comes off. Now you can throw all this away. So there you have it. It's definitely not going to be the prettiest thing in the world, but it's free, came with the car, and it'll hold up the power steering pump just fine, just like it was designed from the factory. I've heard of some people having problems with some of the aftermarket power steering pumps with throwing belts because they're not sturdy enough and they allow it to flex. So we shouldn't have that issue with this. Should be golden, just need to clean it up and throw it on. Okay, I got the power steering pump on using the AC compressor as a bracket. I got the alternator on. You can see that the AC compressor mounts here and here, and then we have a bracket that goes up to the power steering pump, and then the power steering pump sits in a little bracket that attaches there. So that should be pretty solid. Now we can go ahead and throw the serpentine belt on. Got the cool green Gates belt. This is the correct size to use without the AC compressor. So there's the part number for you guys if you're gonna do the same thing. And there we go. Now we have all the accessories on, as well as the serpentine belt. One thing to note, if you're going to be using the Rev 9 intake manifold like I have, you cannot run the power steering reservoir in the stock location because the intake manifold hits. So you have to relocate the reservoir and get an adapter to run the fluid into the pump. So next I'm working on mounting the exhaust manifold and the turbo and getting that all set up. I have the Drift Motion 2JZ GE turbo manifold, and there's one problem that I have with it. So I got this cheap wastegate from Drift Motion. It was like $50 for, I think it's like a 50 mil wastegate. Obviously it's cheap, but it should work fine for my application. The problem is it's a rectangular flange. So the way Drift Motion designed their header, it sits this way, which means the exhaust outlet, the wastegate dump, comes out the side. and there's not enough room in the engine bay for the downpipe to come out of there. So I'm gonna have to cut off this flange off the manifold and turn it sideways so that I can mount the wastegate this way. And then what I'm gonna do is have the wastegate dump tube merge into the downpipe off the turbo so that the wastegate goes out the back with the rest of the exhaust. So it's kind of unfortunate. Didn't really want to have to cut apart this beautiful manifold, but that's the only way I'm going to be able to make it work without spending $200 on a better wastegate that's like V-band. So I'm going to get to that and then we'll move on. Okay, so I got the turbo manifold back on, mounted the turbo, got the wastegate on, and I went to make my turbo drain line. And unfortunately, this $30 Amazon kit is about half worthless. It works here at the bottom, but as you can see, it uses a aluminum flange to bolt to the turbo that has a MPT female fitting, or an MPT female hole, and then it uses an adapter to go from the MPT to the AN. And then it only came with 245s and a straight, so there's no way that this 45 will fit in there and attach to that fitting without running into the turbo manifold. So I'll have to probably buy a fitting that attaches to the turbo that already has AN on it and doesn't have to have this converter, and then do a 90-degree AN fitting instead of the 45. And then I can come out here and then wrap around down to the drain here. The other thing about the Amazon kit is it did not include a fitting to go into the Borg Warner's oil feed. So I'll have to figure out what size that is and order something for that. But then I think the feed line that came in the kit will work. So now I'm going to work on the intake side. I was going to weld the Rev 9 manifold to the intake runners now, but I think I'm going to wait because I don't know yet what all I'm going to have for vacuum stuff that I need to drill holes in the intake for. So I don't want to weld it onto the runners and then drill holes in it and have all kinds of metal shavings stuck in there. So I'm just going to bolt it on for now and continue getting everything else installed. Next up is the VVTi line. So when you put the VVTi head on the non-VVTi block, there's nowhere for you to connect the oil line for the VVTi solenoid. So Drift Motion has this line. It's like $50. It's a little pricey, but it's basically just bolt on and go. So should be pretty simple. It comes with an adapter to thread into the block where the old oil pressure sensor was. So we'll get this connected. So the Drift Motion line requires that you use the factory banjo bolt, and it's very important when you pull the banjo bolt out that you make sure you don't lose this filter. Most likely it's going to stay inside the solenoid, but it might come out with the banjo when you pull it out, so make sure you have that filter in there. There we have our VVTi line. It's a little bit of a pain to get in there. It's almost a hair longer than it needs to be, but I've got it in there. kind of snaked around everything. So I got the heater core coolant line mounted to the water pump, which comes out over here. I tried researching whether or not you could just delete that altogether and block it off. I couldn't find a whole lot of information, so I guess I'd rather be safe than sorry and just run the coolant like it was routed from the factory, which would be to basically bypass the heater core and go from here into the back of the head. So I gotta get a rubber coolant line to go from here to the back of the head, and then I will know that my coolant's circulating the way it's supposed to, getting to all the places it needs to go, and all of that. The other thing left is the oil filter. I have a Mishimoto sandwich plate because the 2JZ has like an oil cooler here from the factory. It's just mounted here, and then the oil filter goes over here. But I have the Mishimoto sandwich plate that will go here, and then it's got 2 AN lines to go to an external oil cooler, which I would highly recommend for a 2JZ, especially a turbo one, because they run really hot. And then that sandwich plate also has 2 1/8" MPT ports on it, which one will feed the turbo and the other one I'll use for an oil pressure sensor. But I need to get the threaded pipe that goes in here, the drift motion cells, so that you can delete the factory cooler and then bolt a sandwich plate onto there. Once I get that, then I can finish off the oil cooler. But that's basically it as far as the engine. There's still going to be some vacuum stuff that I have to figure out, which a lot of that is going to have to attach to the Rev 9 intake manifold. So I'm not ready to do all of that yet. I'm gonna have to figure out what all I need and take care of that later. So other than that, I guess the next thing would be getting the transmission mounted. So here's what I have for a transmission. This is a ZF transmission from a BMW. It is not the transmission that was in this car originally. The earlier models came with the GetRag 5-speed, which is junk. They hold, I think, like 250 horsepower max. But the ZF, it came in the newer gen cars that had the larger engines, like the 328i and even some of the E46s. This transmission supposedly can handle up to like 700 foot-pounds of torque, as long as you have the flex disc in the drive shaft or a clutch delay valve, just something to absorb that shock in the drivetrain. So anyways, got this trans from a junkyard for like 150 bucks. And if you didn't notice, these transmissions are tiny and they weigh almost nothing. I can easily pick this up by myself. So you kind of have an advantage there. A lot of people nowadays are doing the CD09 swap from a 350Z, but that transmission is huge and it weighs a ton. So really the cost is the same for the swap kit, but CD09s are going for like $1,000 now because everyone's using them for swaps. So they're super expensive. They hold pretty much the same amount of power and they're massive. I think the ZF transmission that BMW makes is a way better option, especially since it's going in a BMW. But for any car, I would highly recommend this. So to mount it to the 2J, we have the PMC Motorsports adapter kit, which I purchased from Drift HQ. And Drift HQ sends these freaking awesome keychains, so shout out to them. Not sponsored, maybe someday, but they're a great company to order parts from. So the adapter kit comes with an extended flywheel, because obviously your adapter is going to add space to the back of the engine, so your flywheel needs to stick out quite a bit further. And then obviously it comes with the adapter plate. Super high quality machined aluminum. This adapter plate says right on it that it's for the 2JZ, and it can use the transmission from a M20, M50, M52, S50, S52, M57, M57N, and M57N2. So basically this car had the M50, the 328i had the M52, and then the M3s had the S50 and the S52. So anyways, we've got our adapter plate. Should bolt right up here, something like that. This plate does require that you use the stock automatic transmission flywheel along with the new flywheel, because the starter is going to engage the stock flywheel. So that's another great thing about it. You don't have to do anything funny with the starter. You just use a factory 2JZ starter. And of course, the adapter kit comes with hardware. Then for a clutch, I have a ACT 6-pad, single disc. It's probably going to be awful to drive on the street, but it'll handle the horsepower I'm going to throw at it, and it was budget. I can't remember exactly which clutch and pressure plate you have to use. I think you use like a E46 or an E36 M3 pressure plate and then whatever clutch goes with your car, but don't quote me on that. I'll put the part numbers for this in the description, and if you go to Drift HQ's site, they have the full details on the adapter kit that tell you what clutch and pressure plate you need to use. So then I have the heavy duty pressure plate to go with the clutch. So before we get to mounting all of that, I'm going to take off this flywheel because it looks like crap. It's all rusty, and I know you're never going to see it, but just for peace of mind, I'm going to take it off and try to buff it up a little bit. Okay, I got the flex plate cleaned up pretty good. Not perfect, but good enough since you're not going to see it. At least it's not completely covered in rust and pink spray paint. So now that that is off, the first thing we need to do is put the adapter plate on, which is pretty simple. You line up this little half moon with the starter hole, and then there's 2 dowel pins that it goes onto. Just like that. And now we can put on our flex plate and flywheel, which is going to be fun because you have to align 4 different things with holes in it. The kit provides this crankshaft extension so that the new flywheel has something to sit on and be hub centric, so we need to install that. Just have to tap it in. The kit also comes with new flywheel bolts, which is awesome. You don't have to worry about supplying those. As with any flywheel bolts, you want to make sure you put red thread locker on them. I just put a ratchet on the crankshaft bolt on the front and let it hit the ground so it couldn't turn. Got those all torqued. Guess we can go ahead and put our starter on now. So for the starter, you actually have to drill out the holes on the starter because the starter's threaded. We don't want that. We're gonna run a bolt through the starter into the plate. So we'll drill these out and then we can run a bolt through into the plate. Now we can do the clutch and pressure plate. So ACT provides pressure plate bolts with the pressure plate, but the PCM or the PMC Motorsports kit provides stainless ones that are a little bit longer. So we're going to use the stainless ones, but we're going to use the washers that came with the pressure plate. Okay, I got the pressure plate attached. I put red thread locker on all the bolts and torqued them to 26 foot-pounds. Now the next thing up, the kit supplies this little piece here. This goes underneath the fork here. So we need to replace that. We'll just pull out the throw bearing. And then this guy, this little clip over here. Pull that out. And then this is the guy that needs replaced. As you can see, there's a big size difference between the two. So transfer the clip or the fork retainer to this one. Stick it back in there. Try to shove the fork through there one-handed. Got it. So that goes on there. Just realized that the push rod for the clutch is sitting down here in the bottom of the transmission. So good thing I noticed that. Not sure which way it goes, but I assume it goes this way. No, that can't be right. Alright, give me a second to fix this. Okay, I got the push rod back on there. And now we can throw the throw bearing back in. Now we can put the trans on. I almost forgot PMC provides 2 new dowel pins to put in the transmission. If you look, there's 2 holes that have a shoulder inside, here and here. So we'll just stick these dowels in there. That one's kind of loose for some reason. I'll tap this one in and then we can put the trans on. Okay, I got the transmission on the engine, and I think that's pretty much going to wrap up the engine, at least for now. I've done pretty much all I can do. I have a bunch of parts ordered for it. Those should be coming hopefully pretty soon, and then we can finish up all the little details. But for now, I think I'm going to stick it back in the car once again and see how the transmission fits, kind of get an idea of what all is going on under there, maybe start making a transmission mount, and see how long of a drive shaft I'm going to need. So I'm going to throw this back in there one more time and then we'll close out this video. Okay, small dilemma. With the transmission on, the oil pan is catching right on the corner of here before it can slide down in and get past the subframe. So I can't get it all the way in. This is just the power steering rack tabs. So I think I'm going to take a grinder and just grind off the back corners of these so they're not sticking out so far, and see if that gives me enough clearance to get it in. So grinding those power steering rack mounts did the trick. Was able to get the engine to go in now with the trans on. So she's all fitted up. Now I need to build a trans mount so that I can set the positioning of the engine. And then after that, I can start working on building intercooler piping and mocking up the radiator and everything else. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. If you made it this far into the video, thank you. You're the real hero. It's taking a lot of time and a lot of commitment to do this build and record and edit videos at the same time, but hopefully it's paying off. Hopefully you guys are enjoying it and think it's pretty cool content. My goal is to have this car done in about a month, so that's coming up quick. But now that we have the engine and transmission together and in the car, next we can do intercooler, radiator, and oil cooler, and then after that it's wiring and fuel stuff, and then we should be able to we should be ready to try to start this thing. Make sure to subscribe and stick around for all the rest of the content on this. My plans have kind of changed a little bit, and it might be more beneficial to you guys who are trying to do budget builds. I am going to run a stock GTE ECU on this, at least for now. Budget's kind of running thin, and I just want to get this running so I can drive it. So I'm going to do a stock ECU and just get it running and driving, but I still plan to try to dyno it after that, so we can at least see how much power it's making on the stock ECU with this turbo and all the other stuff to go with it. Hope you guys have a great day or night wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you on the next one.